So, over the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about forgiveness. And today's lesson is going to continue looking at this topic, but we're going to look at a principle that God has given us, which, at least from my point of view, is counterintuitive. It's something that maybe you don't necessarily think of. Consider this. In the days of Jesus, the Jews were looking for an earthly king. They were expecting that when the Messiah came, he was going to come, he was going to liberate the Jews, he was going to kick whoever the oppressors were at the time. And for those of you who are keen on your Bible history, you know that the Jews were oppressed by the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Like there was just a series of different people that had authority over that land. And so Jesus comes, and ultimately what happens to Jesus is he's crucified by the Romans. Yet, if you fast forward a couple hundred years from that, Christianity has taken hold, and the very people that killed Jesus, the Romans, are now the Holy Roman Empire, the primary conduit by which Christianity is spread throughout the world, right? In the first 3 centuries after Jesus, the early church faced periods of severe persecution from the Roman Empire. It was sporadic at first, but then systematically they were persecuted under emperors like Nero, Decius, and Diocletian. Now, I'm not real good on my Roman history for that, but I do recall whenever I was a kid, there were different TV miniseries events. Does anybody old like me remember like when there'd be a show that was on multiple weeks in a row or multiple days in a row? And I remember one of those was a program called AD, and it was the time of the early church. And what I remember most about that, even as a small kid, is that they had scenarios where they would take Christian kids and they would put sheep's clothes on them and they would feed them to the lions in the Colosseum. Right? That's how my memory recalls it. But like that's part of what the early church faced, right? But by the time we get to the 4th century, something absolutely remarkable has happened. The same empire that crucified Christ and executed Christians systematically became the Holy Roman Empire, the political and cultural center of Christianity. And how does that happen? Like, I get that this probably isn't an area of history that you look at very often, but were there battles fought? Like, how did that happen? And part of it was the endurance of the early Christians. They they didn't meet violence with violence, right? They practiced forgiveness, they practiced service, they practiced love towards their persecutors. You know, they we know that all but I believe one of the apostles died a martyr's death, right? They had this, and so in spite of that, even when the church leaders of in those early days, um, the way that the body of believers responded was such a way that the Roman officials had to take notice of it, and it became rather persuasive. And over time, the influence of the early church reached the highest levels of society. And it was the conversion of Constantine the date I have here is 313 AD is what legalized and standardized Christianity in the Roman Empire. Now, somebody can improve my Roman history on that. But I think it's an interesting story, and it's something that maybe we don't look at all that often. So, from a historic perspective, the church's endurance and the church's moral consistency, rather than a political rebellion, um, won hearts and eventually reshaped the premier empire on planet Earth. I want to draw your attention to Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount. If you want to turn with me to Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. These will not be new words to most of you. You've heard this passage before, but I want to make sure that we just take a moment here to make this fresh in our minds. Jesus is teaching, and he says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." Now, I shared that passage. I'm just going to ask you to simmer on that. Put that on the back burner, put the heat on low. Just be with that for a little bit. Now, turn with me to the Gospel of John. John chapter 4. We're going to look at verses 7 through 15. And again, this is going to be a story that you are probably familiar with. This is Jesus and the woman at the well. Verse 7 picks up. It says, "When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, 'Will you give me a drink?' His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, 'You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans.' Jesus answered her, 'If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water.' 'Sir,' the woman said, 'you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock?' Jesus answered, 'Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life.' The woman said to him, 'Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water.'" Jesus is talking about water. He's talking about water here. Now, I had to do a little bit of research on this, but it was about 450 BC. You're getting a little bit of extra history here this week. But it was around 450 BC that a Greek philosopher by the name of Empedocles, does anybody really care to spell that? Just take my word, Empedocles. He would have predated Aristotle. But Empedocles suggested that the world was made of 4 elements: earth, fire, wind, water. Those are the 4 elements, right? Now, I'm going to ask you this morning, of those 4 elements, which one's the most important? Water? Which one's the most destructive? Which one's the most powerful? Right? I mean, I believe that it's water. I believe that water is the most important of all those. Water can put out the fire, right? Fire can level a forest, but water can wash a forest away, right? And that's where it is. And so I thought we would take a moment here at the beginning, talk a little bit about water. And I'm going to give you, I'm going to suggest to you that water happens, right? So the H that I would give you to remember this is that water is humble. If you were to pour water out, water always goes to the lowest place. Water is adaptable. There's water in this cup. Water adapts to whatever environment it is in. It takes the shape of whatever container you put water in. It is adaptable. Water is persistent, right? It wears down the hardest stone through steady flow. Like it just keeps going. Now, I have a house full of kids. My wife and I despise doing chores ourselves. So what do? We assign them to the kids. And it's always fun whenever one kid gets the assignment to do the dishes, especially when it's been a particularly messy meal, like, well, any meal. I guess it doesn't really matter, but they're all messy. But like there's some things. Have you ever put a dish in the pot and you just let it overnight to soak? Anyone ever done that? Right? You know, like the idea is that we'll let the water soften it up. Well, water persists, right? It keeps going. Water is powerful. Water is powerful. It can erode away mountains, it can carve canyons, and it can quench fire. Right? It's a powerful element. What I think what's interesting about it though is that while it can do all those big things, you can take your hand and you can pass it right through water, can you not? It can wear down a mountain, but your hand can go right through it. Isn't that an interesting thing? Water is essential. It sustains life on this planet. And the last thing that I would tell you about water is that it is non-resistant. Something gets in its way, it doesn't care. It goes a different way. Right? Anybody ever gotten your way? Have you cared? Yeah. I think we probably all can answer that in the positive, right? Water is the most non-resistant substance on earth, yet it's also the most powerful. It never fights, yet nothing can ultimately stand against it. I think that's a pretty interesting thing for us to look at today. Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 38, Jesus says, "Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Now, I want you to just imagine this with me. I want you to imagine that you have a rock, right? And then you have a pitcher of water. And if you started to pour that water over the rock, what happens? It hits the rock, and does it get mad that it hits the rock? No, it just adjusts. It goes with whatever direction it can go, and it just flows around the rock. Now, if you were to do that long enough, what would happen to the rock? It would erode, right? It would change. It would change that rock over time. And I would suggest to you that this is how Jesus moves in us. Jesus moves in us, and he moves in people in general. He moves in cultures. He moved in the Roman Empire, right? And it was not by resistance, but by flow. He just Just kept doing it. I'm going to circle back to something that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 and 39 specifically. Jesus says, "You have heard that it is said, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Over the last couple of weeks, we have looked at the law of forgiveness. I believe last week we looked at the law of release. Today we're going to look at the law of non-resistance. Today is the law of non-resistance. Now, I have a lengthy definition for this. When we refuse to fight life's problems in fear or anger. Has anybody ever found themselves there, fear or anger? Like today? Right? When you refuse to do that, we align ourselves with divine power. That cannot be stopped. When we refuse to fight life's problems in fear or angers, when we meet opposition, we face it with faith and peace. We align ourselves with the divine power that cannot be opposed, cannot be stopped. The law of non-resistance teaches that when we stop opposing evil with evil, right? When we refuse to fight life's challenges with fear or anger or judgment, we disarm those oppositions spiritually. Now, what's interesting is that non-resistance is not about passivity. It's not about being passive. It's about power under peace. It's about peace. It's the refusal to allow negativity to dictate our response. You've probably read this one before, Romans 12:21. Paul writes, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good," right? Do not be overcome by evil, things that are against God's rule, that are against God's design, right? Don't be overcome by those. Instead, overcome evil with good. James 1:20. James 1:20 reads, "Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." So when Jesus gives us this instruction, when he says, "Do not resist an evil person," he is not telling us to be weak. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I understood that for a long time. I I don't know that I got that. He is not telling us to be weak. Rather, he was showing us strength under divine control. You see, resistance strengthens what you oppose. But when we surrender to God, it dissolves evil's power over us. Now, if it's possible for you to think less of me, this story may do it. It may do it. I have what I like to think is a pretty good sense of humor. Now, not everybody agrees with me. So if I'm in the living room and I happen to look on the couch and I see that there's a pillow nearby, I may say, Owen, you're right here. You're in my line of sight. I can see you. If I'm sitting here, Owen's in the living room with me, and I see a pillow, I may say something like, Hey, Owen, would you like to see something funny? If Owen were to say yes, I would take the pillow, smack him in the face with it. I think that's funny. I think it's funny. Every once in a while, like, and I've had a couple of good ones. I've had is this yes, it does. It does. There was one day I walked in and I saw my nephew across the living room, and there was a pillow. And I didn't ask him at first. I took the pillow and I lofted it like a frisbee. And then I said, and I don't remember which nephew this was, but then I said their name, and they looked up, whack, got him right in the face. Funniest thing I've ever done. And I mean, it's up there. It's up there. I thought that was really, really funny. But you know, there was a time whenever I was a teenager where I had a pillow and I threw it at my brother and whacked him pretty good, right? And after I threw it, I declared that the battle was over. I had won, obviously, and my brother disagreed. So he picked up the pillow and he threw it back at me. And so I did what a teenager does is I picked the pillow back up and I threw it at him and I said, I told you I've won, whack. This is where it is. And instead, what he does is he throws it back at me, and it's sort of escalating here. There's some resistance happening. And things are getting a little more noisy. And my dad comes in, he's like, what's going on here? And I'm like, well, obviously I started this battle. I obviously won, right? I got the first hit. It was the funniest. It was this whole thing. And he said to me, why do you keep throwing it back to him? Every time I throw the pillow back to him, he can just throw it back at me, right? All I keep doing is I keep giving him ammunition to throw my way, right? So now what I've learned is that you do that when the pillow comes back, I just hold it, right? And then I can claim victory again. Again, you can think less of me if you can, right? Um, but when the resistance when you decide to stop resisting, like I can just start throwing pillows at people, and if they don't react to it, they could be sitting there in a pile of pillows, and it's somehow it's not quite as funny after you put 4 or 5 pillows on them. That's just where it is. Now, in case you were wondering, I would tell you this: it can still be funny to hit somebody with a pillow. It really can, at least in my opinion. Um, And perhaps the most funny way to do it is just to get a really good one, and then when it comes back, just be done and sort of walk away. And that's kind of my best scenario for that. But let's go back to water. I really want to make sure that we understand how water works. Water is the most non-resistant substance on the planet, right? It flows where it's guided. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. Um, it yields to every obstacle that comes in its way. Right? Have you ever watched like raindrops sort of cascade your windshield on your car? Like it's just finding the easiest way down. That's what it's always doing, and it can be fascinating to watch. But if you give it enough time, water can wear down something completely. That's what it is. It doesn't resist the rock, but it will smooth the rock over time. And so water teaches us that non-resistance isn't weakness. It's divine power expressed through gentleness. Just real easy going, right? Water does not react to its environment. What water does is water transforms its environment. So I'm curious this morning if maybe you feel like there's some place in your life where you've been really pushing against. Is there something, is there some mountain that you're facing right now? What if? What if your response was not to be pushing against that mountain? But what if your response was to be like water and flow around it? What if? Right? What if you were like water and you had a calm, steady, faithful response? Would that be different for your situation? I I don't know how this would go. I thought about I did this I was given this experiment one time, and I would encourage you to do this experiment with somebody else who isn't as informed as what you are right now. But what I have found is that if you ask somebody to hold their hand up like this, and then you hold your hand up against it, and if you start pushing, instinctively what people do is push back, right? Now, I couldn't figure out how I could get you all to do this without telling you that, hey, you got to push and push back. I did this experiment with Brendan one day because Brendan is resistant. She's a lot like her dad, right? So I said, hey, Brendan, hold, and I said, hold your hand up. She held her hand up, and I put my hand up against it, and I started to push, and her hand went back maybe an inch or two, but then she immediately started pushing back. And there's some part of that which is very much human nature, right? That, about different things in life, we just naturally will become resistant to. So I would encourage you to just try this with somebody today. Ask them to hold their hand up. And you may have a situation where you push and the hand goes back, but I think far too often you'll find is as soon as you start to push, that other person will start pushing back, right? That's just the nature of resistance. Whenever I was a kid, I only ever went to Conneaut Lake Park, I think maybe 2 or 3 times as a kid. And one time I went with my cousins from Clarion, which is one of the few memories like childhood memories I have of doing something like that with those cousins. Now, my cousins were all 3 or 4 years older than me, so I was the little kid in this group, and they were going around and doing the different rides. And at the time, the premier ride was the Blue Streak. Anybody ever ridden the Blue Streak? All right, so I'm a little kid and I'm getting ready to go on this Blue Streak. And I've never been on a roller coaster before. I don't know what to expect. And I get in the I get in the cart and I'm going up. And then as soon as I start to go downhill, I realize this now. I don't know that I had the language for it then, but I realize I'm resisting. And I resisted in a way that I became very rigid. And as such, I did not enjoy the ride hardly at all. Right? It was just like everything was. If you go with the flow, like my understanding is that roller coasters could be better. So, based on that experience, I decided that I was not a roller coaster type guy. That's what it was. That was an experience that I had whenever I was young. I went through it. I went through that experience with resistance, and now Trace and I are married. And what do? We go to Universal Studios. So we're in Universal Studios Orlando, and we're looking at this roller coaster that is absolutely amazing. It is the Incredible Hulk roller coaster, and what it is like the cars come in, and then there's like this tube, and like they and correct me on this. Like they like shoot you up this tube, and then as soon as you come out and there's daylight, then immediately they start twisting you and you go upside down and you do all these different things. Now Trace loves roller coasters. I was scared of roller coasters. Yet I would look at this roller coaster and I would hear all the people having such a good time on this roller coaster. Like, it sounds so wonderful. It sounds so wonderful. And Trey says, well, if you're not going to go on it, I'm going to go on it. And I said, okay. And she goes on it. Now, I'm pretty sure this was our honeymoon. We've been there twice. I don't remember which time it was, but she decides that she's going to go on it. She comes off. She's like, that roller coaster ride was amazing. You really should go on it. And I was just like, I don't know, sweetheart. I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun. I don't know. And then she said the words. She said, I thought I married a man. At which point, at which point I decide, well, let's go do it. Yeah, I'm in. I'm in, right? And I will tell you, I think I went through that. I mean, the entire ride's probably 45 seconds. Like I don't know how it's not a super long ride, but you're out and you're up and you're all over the place. I'm going to tell you, when I came off that roller coaster, I was as green as the Hulk. Man, I was sick. Like I walked to a chair and I'll be here for a bit, carry on, have a good time. But like but what is it? I'm going through these rides and I'm going through it with resistance. And as you go through with resistance, you get jostled around in such a way that it can make you sick. After we did that, there was another roller coaster that Trace wanted to go on. I just sat in the corner and tried not to be sick. But since then, I will tell you that she has taught me there is a better way to ride the roller coaster. And now, like, my kids don't have many memories of me. Well, they probably do have memories of me not riding some roller coasters. There's times that I would like, I'll just keep the kids. You guys go have fun, right? But that's how it is. There are times when things can irritate or offend us. There's times that things can throw us off balance, right? What's your instinctive reaction? Like what? Most of us resist. Most of us, whenever that happens, we resist, we defend, we justify, sometimes we attack whenever we get knocked off balance. Our posture changes whenever we're knocked off balance. Sometimes people get in a huff about things. Sometimes we take an offense, right? I think there's way too many believers who are quick to take offense. I think do you know someone who takes offense just because somebody else told them that they need to be offended about something? There's a whole culture of that out there. There's a whole culture of that. Hey, bless you. It's human nature, right? But I also want to warn you that it's potentially dangerous. It's potentially dangerous. Fear, anger, and resentment will tie you to the very things that you dislike, right? Non resistance will release you from the things that you dislike. I want you to think about that for a minute. When you connect fear, or when you connect anger, when you connect resentment or some emotion to something that you dislike, what happens? That thing that you dislike becomes stickier. You see it all the more. You see it all the more. Proverbs 15:1. Proverbs 15:1 reads, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." When we resist people, we empower them. I'm going to give a political illustration here. Now, I am reasonably sure that there's probably a particular political persuasion in this room. However, I'm going to try to offend everybody equally. Okay? Your invitation here is to just let it go. Non-resistance, right? There's some of you who maybe have a particular political persuasion for one political party or another. That, and over the last 20 years, we've had the privilege of having people from both political parties in the highest office in the land. And what happens? You see people who are offended that these people are in office. And what happens? The more they talk about it, the more resentful they become. Like it's a mess. And I don't care which way you look at it, you can find evidence both ways. Some of you go online and you can find people who share stuff that say, hey, you need to be mad about something that somebody did. Now, I hope that doesn't describe you, but it describes some of us, right? What are you resisting? When we resist circumstances, we magnify those circumstances. When we resist change, we make that transition of change all the longer and more of a struggle, right? But when we let God handle it, when we move with His current, that's a much better place to be, is it not? I'm going to give you an IQ test here. Smart, those of you in this room that are smart, you'll get it. Some of you, it may take a little bit longer. But the question is this: is it better to work with God or is it better to work against Him? Just out of curiosity, IQ test. Those of you that want to work with God, those of you that want to work against Him. Right? It's an IQ test. Can you think of a time when fighting harder in a situation made the situation worse? Can you think of that? And I want you to imagine how might non-resistance have changed that encounter? Throwing a pillow at my brother. I won already. Stop. He throws it back at me. I told you I won. Why do you keep doing this? Just hold on to it. Right? Take the higher road there. How am I doing on time? 31. Okay. In both nature and in spirit, resistance creates friction, and non-resistance creates flow. Water doesn't work against gravity, it works with gravity. And it works with it all the time. It is in complete harmony with gravity. And I'm going to suggest to you that it can be the same for us when we align ourselves with God's laws. When we align ourselves with God, His laws, and His will, His power carries us instead of our own efforts. trying to carry us, right? Resistance comes from fear, but non-resistance comes from faith. Resistance says, I got to fix this. And I'm a guy. I've said that far too many times, right? Non-resistance says, God's got this figured out. I want to just take a moment to connect this with forgiveness, as that's been sort of the theme over the last couple of weeks. And I want you to know that non-resistance is forgiveness in motion. Non-resistance is forgiveness before the offense has time to stick. And for this, Jesus modeled this for us on the cross, Luke 23:34. Jesus is being crucified, something that he did not deserve. And how did he go through it? Was he passive or was he non-resistant? He was non-resistant. He was exercising power beyond anything that we can probably comprehend. He was refusing to let evil provoke a reaction from him. And while this is happening, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. In the midst of that, he is forgiving. Now, we've all heard that story before, I imagine. I don't think there's anybody that hasn't heard that. But have you realized just the timing of that? The offense is ongoing, and he is in an ongoing way forgiving them. I think it's a really powerful thing to do. When we live with non-resistance, we forgive in real time. You stop collecting new offenses, and you stop living at the mercy of external chaos. And what happens is we become more like water, yielding but unstoppable, peaceful but powerful. For those of you that have not yet fallen asleep, I'm going to invite you, as long as you promise me not to fall asleep, to close your eyes for a moment. I want you to imagine standing beside a stream. And I want you to just watch how the water flows effortlessly against the stones. The water doesn't stop, doesn't fight, it just flows. And I want you just to think of something that maybe has been frustrating you lately. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a situation, maybe there's some repeated irritation. Now, instead of fighting it, instead visualize yourself flowing past it. Just flow past it. And think to yourself, I offer no resistance. I trust God to handle this perfectly. Romans 8:28, Paul tells us, all things work together for good for those who love God. So the next time you feel resistance rise up, remember this stream, remember this water, stay fluid, stay faithful, and allow God to flow through you in a peaceful way. You can open your eyes up before you start to snore. As we wrap up today, I want to encourage you to take a minute and just ask yourself, where in your life are you bracing against something that God might be asking you to flow through? Where do you find that struggle? Where do you find that resistance? And submit that to Him. Submit that to him. With that, that's where we're going to end today. We will pick up next week and continue looking at this idea of forgiveness.